Hello and happy Monday. Welcome back. Almost said welcome back to another Monday. That sounded redundant for saying Monday twice. Anyway, today, the thing that was really sitting on my mind leading up to this was, I'll frame it this way. What's one of the biggest blockers to successful therapy? There are a lot of things that can block people from getting into the door, getting the process started. And then there are a lot of things that can block the process from moving forward. Now, one of the main ones, the one that I'll talk about today, is follow through, habit formation, consistency with the thing that's being worked on. And I want to talk on this lightly because there's a lot that goes into that. It's not necessarily just like a willpower, determination, maturity thing, although sometimes that's there, and it's probably a factor most of the time, but it's not the thing. Which is true for most people that don't follow through on stuff. It's not necessarily issues with character traits, because you want to pay attention to when people can do this in other areas too. So, for instance, if somebody really needs to work on stress reduction, and we've identified that breathing is helpful for that, doing daily breathing exercise, that practicing meditation where they are focusing on just one thing at a time, pushing out other thoughts, which is what you could do when negative thoughts come in as well. You push them out. So breathing, meditation, maybe even something like journaling, they have found gets some of their stress out at the end of the day. Maybe we'll just say those three things. And they're not doing them on a daily basis, which is super common. And I think a couple things can happen there, but you can pay attention to whether or not people are consistent in other areas of their life. So one interesting detail about that is people will be consistent perhaps to going to therapy. They'll go to the thing that's supposed to help, but then they won't do the follow-up activity. So that's interesting to pay attention to. How can you be here consistently, but you won't do this other thing consistently? Now, there is a difference between doing something once a week and doing something daily, or even 3 times a day. If I'm saying, you should meditate, journal, work on breath work, stuff like that. There's a lot that goes into follow through, and some of that is on the therapist for setting people up for success. The same way it would be the case for a parent trying to teach their kids any lessons, is you have to give the appropriate amount of challenge that the chances of them succeeding are likely, but also not so low that there's really no improvement happening. Now, I think the hard part about this for adult to adult is the other person has to be interested and willing to do that step and think that it'll be useful. So it doesn't even matter how easy I make the step. If they just won't do it, it's not going to be helpful. And part of the reason someone won't do it is they don't think it's going to be helpful, or they're not sold on it. They're not bought into it as much or more than you are. And for some people, that's just being able to tell them, like, hey, this will work if you do it. Or let's try it once or twice. And like, it did work, it helped. Like, then you have to trust that it will continue to work. And most change that happens in therapy is making long-term changes, I would argue. I think you have, and it depends on the person. Like, if you're coming in for a lot of trauma work, a lot of that upfront therapy work might not necessarily be quick, but you'll feel that intensity in a different way than making long-term changes. There's that dealing with the past element, which does feel different than creating growth for the future. They're connected, but they are different, and I think a lot of people feel the difference when they're working on one or the other. So, yeah, a lot goes into follow through. Do we believe in the thing that we're doing? Do we see the value in it? Is it something, are we in a position rather that we can't follow through very well or not? The biggest example I give for a lot of people, kind of 2 main examples. One is going to work and the other is using social media. So most people can go to work 40 hours a week, and a lot of those people won't even necessarily complain about it. A lot still will, but people can go to work for 40 hours a week, and they'll do it every week, especially the ones that don't like it. Now that's really telling that you can make yourself do something for 40 hours a week. So why can't you spend 15 minutes a day doing this thing that's good for you? And yes, there's an argument of, well, there's only so many hours in the day, and I add this. I don't know for sure if I've ever met someone who didn't actually have room to add. There's like a handful of people I can think of that probably don't have a lot of space to add stuff to their life. But most people, even those of us that are under a lot of stress and are dealing with quite a lot in our life circumstances, we're still living in an era and in a place that we have more leisure than we think we do. Again, this isn't, you can filter that through your place that you're in, but most people do have more leisure than they think, and they do have room to fit in 15 to 60 minutes a day to work on their health. And that doesn't mean you can do that with every category. What that means is you can focus on mental health intensely for weeks to months to years, get a foundation there, and then shift to other things, or that becomes a habit and it's not as mentally taxing, and now you can work on other things. So it's not about every area of your life that needs improvement and being told, oh, you can fit an hour in all these, or 15 minutes in all these. That's obviously not going to be realistic for a lot of people. But making a decision where if you're focused and committed to improving at something, which, to be clear, if someone's coming to therapy weekly, the built-in assumption is that you are committed to the process. That's a big commitment to do something weekly. You think about people who play sports, or you think about musicians, and they're doing lessons and practices and trainings. This is a committed task, and any other hobby or activity that they're doing is probably going to be much smaller and just gets a little bit of space when they are a little bit tired or fatigued from their other hobby. But the big focus is this thing that they're taking extra time and money to go train for. And I would view therapy as that. If you're taking the time and money to go, and you have a therapist suggest, hey, you should work on this, I would argue that is in your best interest to work on that thing. And know that it might not be the most useful task for you every single time, but at least being able to come back the next week or within 2 weeks and be like, I tried it every day like you asked, and this is how it went. So sometimes I'm just surprised at the amount of time and money that people will invest in therapy, but then they won't invest in that in their own time. And I do think some people think that just going to therapy is enough, but it's a collaborative process, and a lot of work can be done in the therapy room, and sometimes the work has to be done there. A lot of the trauma work, I don't really necessarily recommend a lot of people go home and just start practicing trauma work. That's really important to be done in a certain space. So that makes sense. And even that, there's often some time between that session and the next where it's like, this is something to pay attention to in the week in between. That can be various things, but paying attention to, okay, you do still have something that you have to work on between now and next week. And then there are some weeks where it says, it's just like, take the week off and don't work on anything at home. There are weeks where people take time off therapy, and that's fine too. But my encouragement for anyone in therapy listening to this, or anyone considering it, is do it when you know you can commit to actually doing the things that the therapist is telling you to work on. And it's the same for any professional you go to. Like I said, music, sports, physical therapy, doctors, all of this. Just, if you're going to invest, do it. Go all in, take care of yourself. And yeah, so most people, to circle back around, they can work all day, and then the moment they have to do just a 15-minute task a day for their health, they fall through on that. That's a very curious thing to me. But one of the factors that plays there is they're just not tapping into that part of their mind that can do something for a long period of time. And to be fair, just saying someone works all day can mean very different things. So me working all day, if I had sessions all day, I'm going to be way more exhausted than if I just have paperwork, or if I'm doing recordings or writing something. And like, the work isn't completely equal. You can oversimplify it and say, well, you're working on something. But they're different things. Someone going to a construction site all day is not the same as someone teaching an elementary school class all day. It's not the same as someone working as an accountant. Like, they are different things and they tax us differently. And the amount of joy that you find in the work that you do is going to make a pretty big difference. And that's life-giving, joyful work often energizes us instead of drains us. So there are a lot of factors, but the point still remains on a kind of rudimentary level. If you can do something for a long period of time, why can't you do something for a short period of time over here? So, and that's a good starting place for a question. If you are doing work all day, or if you're coming home and you're scrolling on social media for 3 hours, or you're watching YouTube and TV and games and whatever, none of which are inherently wrong, but when there's other things that need done, there's a question of why can you do that for so long, but not this? And that's a baseline question, and I think a lot of people listening, you can think of reasons why that transition won't work. And this isn't about just saying, well, obviously you can do it, so go do the other thing. But it is a foundational question of, I know I need to do this thing, and I currently have the time, but I'm rather spending it over here doing this. Why? And being able to ask that question of what is getting in the way from me doing the things that are important that I need to do, and instead doing things that aren't important. And, I'm not in the camp that believes that you need most of the things to recharge that you say you need. You think about most of history, we haven't had phones, television, video games, the things that most people spend their time on. A lot of people read a lot of books. Those have been around for a while. But how we view rest and leisure is somewhat first world in a lot of ways. Now, at the same time, things like play are really important. They're actually integral to development and get really under-recognized, but playfulness is an unbelievably underrepresented trait for overall joy in life and growth and development. It's not even close. People learn about 400 times faster when learning through play than they do through just learning directly, like reading, picking something up. It's an unbelievable statistic, and I don't believe it half the time. This is why people will play board games and often say, like, let's just do a trial round so I can learn while I play. Or you've never played cornhole, or you've never played a game of 21 or Pig or all this stuff, and you're like, can we just play around? And you will learn quicker, assuming someone is actually explaining it to you as you play. But all the extra stimulus, and if you can have fun during those trial rounds, you learn so much faster. Anytime you can make anything fun or playful, it's probably one of the few things that I would consider like a human superpower if you can tap into. A lot of people talk about sleep as a superpower, the importance of getting good sleep. I think from my field, well, sleep is good for mental health too, so I would still put that in my field. But playfulness, unbelievable how much that helps. And there are times where that's inappropriate. If you're working through really awful trauma, you don't want to turn it into a fun, playful thing. That's different. But that's also not quite the same as like learning and growing. That's addressing something you already know to be there and going at it and taking care of it and overcoming it. So you're maybe learning how to do the overcoming piece, but I think at most you can maybe feel encouraged and ready for the challenge of it. But I wouldn't ever argue someone to try to have fun necessarily with that kind of work, or with anything that's hard. Any spousal debates or your kids going through a hard time or something. But I think most people listening are smart enough to know what I mean. Anything that you want to develop at and grow at and progress at, or even a job that you're not crazy about, if you can find a way to make it fun, assuming it's not bad because of abusive environments or something, it's just not your thing. It's just not your thing. Find a way to make it fun. Try to find a way to make it engaging, and you'll actually enjoy doing it. I had a job at Barnes & Noble for quite a few years, and my primary job was working in the warehouse. And while I was there, it shifted coworkers and management a lot, and it kind of got to the point where I was just in my corner doing my own thing, primarily working on returns and the shelves in the back for items that need returned and to go out. And one of my favorite things to do was to clear those like to a T and get things to fit perfectly. And we had weight limits for the boxes, and most of the boxes were uniform size, and there are ways to pack it specifically, and I just loved doing that, and I could do it all day because each box was a new challenge for how to pack it a certain way. Shelves were a challenge as well. Sometimes my job would be to remove items off the floor and put them back on the shelves, and I always got really excited when someone else was doing that job and like, oh, I couldn't get this to fit, or I couldn't get it to do that, and my immediate thing was like, I can get it to fit, I can get it to do that. And it became a fun challenge for me, and there was definitely learning involved, but it got to the point where it was past learning and it was more on refinement and can I do it better. And it made the job so much more fun, and that was an easy one for me to tap into. Other times tapping into that playfulness is harder. So I would say that to anyone here, like anytime you can tap into it, use that quickly and know that that's not going to be a skill that's 100% translated in terms of ease of use across the board, but it's a skill that can still be translated overall, and you can learn to develop it. And it's really, really helpful to do. And it is not in any way like a silver linings issue of, well, we're just pretending it's good. It's actually finding ways to make it fun and tap into the childlike nature that we're all supposed to have. And it can also be a sign of when that was really hard in your childhood. If this is really difficult to do, it can maybe point to some issues in your younger days. So if you have trouble making something playful, and I would say it's like really hard, take a moment to wonder about and remember if your childhood was fun and you remember how you did have fun or didn't. And that could tell you a lot about what you had as a kid to maybe guide some of the next steps in terms of like, oh, I this is how I can tap into fun. Or maybe there were some holes in childhood and there was a lot of things I didn't get and I need to go work through that with someone. So yeah, just some things to think about. If you are going to therapy, in your mind, please make sure you know that there's commitment that you'll have to do between sessions. It's not all just working through stuff. And sometimes that commitment is just taking what was useful in that session and reflecting on it throughout the week. It doesn't have to be homework. I often tell my clients that I don't do homework, I do reflection activities. It's when you think about stuff and pay attention to stuff. I do assign some homework, but a lot of the time it's, can you do this? We'll say meditation. Can you meditate X amount of time? I usually try not to give homework if the client doesn't say they can do it. And then we have something to talk about next week. Did it work? Did you do it? Why or why not? What did you notice about it? And you just kind of go from there. So yeah, it's a really big deal. Follow through on the things that you say you're going to do, and follow through on your growth and development. It's, people talk about life hacks a lot, and they talk about, I hear this a lot with finances. What's the secret to being financially well off? What's the secret to, having a really good body? What's the secret to having great relationships? And it's just doing small things 1,000 times. What's the secret to being a good musician? What's the secret to learning the language? It's all just, you just have to do it every single day until you're good at it. And that's it. And it's actually easy in terms of reading the task. It's perhaps hard in execution. But yeah, if you want to change your physical self and hit the gym and be in a different place with your physical health and your body, it's very easy on paper for most people. There's always going to be some small percentage of people that have medical issues and things like that. But the issue is people hear that and they think, oh, I'm that percentage. I think that's, I've always done sports, and things like physical fitness and diet have always been relevant. Whether I've given them a lot of time or not has changed. But it's all often a really easily relatable thing for people because we all have narratives around food and fitness and stuff like that. But the amount of times there's a very small percentage of people who really just can't lose weight from traditional calorie cutting and watching their calories and exercising. And they just won't lose weight. And it's a really small percentage of people that have some other issues going on with their body and they struggle. But the amount of people that I hear who just say, well, I tried it and it didn't work, or they look at me and they say like, well, you can because you're younger, or you're this, or you're that, or you're that. To me, that's in one ear and out the other. It's usually garbage. It's not true. For some people, it is. So I'm not just going to default and say, no, that's not true. However, the amount of people who say that they're in that small percentage, it isn't true. Most people just haven't actually tried. And that's a really hard thing when people say they're coming to therapy sometimes and they're really trying, or they're doing this activity and they're really trying. And sometimes they might be putting in all the effort that they have. That's a very real thing. It's just not enough yet. And then in that case, you have to figure out, okay, what's a realistic goal for the amount of input you can do? And think about that from like a child's perspective. Like, you wouldn't have a high standard for how a child can get ready in the morning. If they're like 3, you're going to help them tie their shoes. You're probably going to help them put some clothes on, but you got to find what the thing is that they can do well. And developmentally, we can be stuck at child stages for hard work, for emotional capacity and things like that. Different parts of us can be stunted at certain ages and we can be behind developmentally. So some people really are trying as hard as they can and they're not making it very far. Like, part of my beard fell off of my mouth. Blah. Anyway, so that's a really important piece to remember. However, a lot of people just don't realize how little effort they're actually putting into the thing. So most people say, oh, I looked into that and I didn't understand it. And what they meant is they spent like 10 or 15 minutes reading an article. That's not looking into it. That's no time at all. That's less than most people's commute to work once. So the real thing is, no, did you spend 5, 10, 15, 20 hours actually studying it and you still don't understand? Think about going to school and how much you have to study for one class. Even if you don't study, how many times you just go to the class? It's more than that. It's more than 20 hours usually. And then you think about other people who are like, well, I tried eating well and calorie counting. It's like, well, what did you actually do? And like, well, I just thought about, this is salad. Just think it's probably like 300 calories, 200 calories. And then I eat pretty well. I stop eating some ice cream. Like, those are good steps, but you're not calorie counting. Calorie counting means everything that you ate, you counted. Everything. The mint that you ate, you counted. The dressing that you put on your salad, you measured it to a T and realized that the dressing alone was 300 calories and you thought the whole salad was 200. That was another beard hair. My gosh. Special privileges for everyone who made it this far in the video. And same with fitness. Someone's like, I'm working hard at it every single day. And what they mean is they just kind of go to the gym and they do a little bit and they don't actually push themselves. And same with diet. If they're eating a lot of protein and focusing on those macros versus not, and micronutrients, all this stuff. And most people just aren't doing that. And when you actually do that on paper, it's easy. I mean, pretty much the only thing that I do for mine is calorie counting and tracking protein. And then when I'm in the gym, I work very hard and I don't like it all the time. So, and that's it. And same with anything that you're working on. Music. I practice every day. That's it. And sometimes I'm practicing for hours, and sometimes it's just a little bit whatever I can get in. And other people need to structure that differently. So I didn't mean this to be a rant. I'm not really trying to call people out. What I'm trying to say is, when you say, I've tried it and it didn't work, you really owe it to yourself, especially if it's something that you want. If it's something you don't want to do, I don't care. If you're saying, I want to be physically healthy this way, I want better sleep, I want better mental health, I want to get good at this task or this hobby or this thing, and I really want to, and I tried and it didn't work, then that's who I'm talking to, that person, not someone who's flippantly interested in stuff, but someone who's like, I really want this to work, and I've tried and it didn't. If that's you, my recommendation is to sit down honestly and really figure out if you tried it or not. Actually figure it out. And a couple ways to do that are to look up people who really do that thing. So again, I'll use music as an example. As a musician, if you look up, I just recently saw an interview with Kenny G, and I don't know how old it is, but oh gosh, I think it's saxophone. right? Very, very talented. The go-to name for that kind of thing. Probably like the go-to name for brass instruments, honestly, at this point. And he was just talking about his process, and he made it sound so simple. He's like, when I started out, I was practicing for hours a day. He said something like, I didn't make the high school team or the band seat that I wanted, so I just went home and I practiced 4 hours every single day. He's like, if someone wants to get good, they just practice 4 or 5 hours a day. And he's like, you maybe don't need it as much later on in life. But yeah, that's all. It was just so oversimplified. But it's true. You just put in the work. And I think some people are thinking, I'm doing it even if you're doing it every day, they're like, I'm putting in the work and I'm not getting better. And you hear someone like that, a hardcore professional, and they're like 5 hours a day. And you're like, oh, I'm not trying as hard as that person. And you have to also understand that doesn't mean 4 or 5 hours. If you're starting anything new, everything I've said so far, anything music, anything sports, anything for physicality, so diet, fitness, sleep, mental health, all of that. Most of that you can do a very small amount a day and you'll do well. And fitness is what they call like newbie gains. Like you don't have to spend a lot of time in the gym to start noticing your body looking better or your muscles getting bigger. And it just takes a little bit of eating well to see some change. But the more involved and the more intense that gets and the more higher tier you want to be, the more you have to double down. This is the part of the 80-20 principle, which I use all the time in therapy. But some of you have heard, if you just show up to class, you'll get a C. It's because you just kind of learn by being around stuff. And so the idea for the 80-20 principle in terms of learning is that 80% of, we'll look at it from a test score perspective, 80% of what you are testing on, if you're taking your test, you'll get a B, an 80%, if you spent 20% of your study capacity learning that. What do I mean by that? So let's say to get an 80 on a test, it takes 20% of your overall study effort. Great. So what does it take to get to a 90? Well, those start to now curve exponential. So, let's say this is a graph of 100. So this is time spent, we'll say percentage of total ability to study. And then this is score you get. When you hit about 20%, you'll be at about an 80. I'm realizing this might be mirrored for you now. So sorry if the graph is backwards. So you're at an 80. You're like, wow. So if I just spend another 20%, not even, I'll be way past 100. No, because exponential means it slowly goes up and then gets quicker. So the exponential growth is actually kind of exponential in the opposite direction, where it kind of curves off. The amount of time that you spend gets really stretched for marginal gains. And so, I study, actually, I got it right here. This bad boy, DSM-5 TR. Most copies aren't this thick. I don't know how I got mine. I do know how. I don't know why it's this big, but this is expected to be known in its full length when you take your licensing exam as a therapist. It is over 1,000 pages and is every known mental health disorder that we have, all the diagnostic criteria, all of the information that you would need to diagnose someone. And so that gives you an idea of the thick, how small the letters are. And we're supposed to know all 1,000 pages among about another 10,000 things for the test. And whenever I'm telling students and new postgrads how to study for it, what I'll tell them is just know the basic things on it. So you need to, like, acute stress disorder versus PTSD. Just know the difference in timeline, because they're pretty much the same disorder, except one of them is a shorter time frame and the other one is long term. So just know that part. And same when they're studying theories, or talk about bipolar as well, and the mood disorders. Like, just understand what hypomania is connected to, understand what mania, what depression, and just those little pieces instead of all the main criteria. Try to remember the things that signify that issue specifically. And then as a clinician, if you just remember that, it's like, oh, that's a hypomanic episode. Then you can just jump right to this and go into hypomania, and it makes it quicker to find what the diagnosis is. And the same for theoretical understanding. If you're a Bowennian therapist, you should know just keywords, triangulation, differentiation. Those are often attached to Bowennian work. if you're doing symbolic experiential therapy, satir therapy, know that they are experiential. There's probably going to be more movement involved, and there's going to be certain interventions that are connected with that. Strategic, know that that's going to be a lot more black and white. Same with structural, and that there's going to be more positioning, and just have a basic understanding, and maybe the names of the theorists. And I was actually about to give an example, and then I had like a little bit of like, I might misremember who that is. I'll call myself out. I'm pretty sure Jay Haley is structural. I'm going to put that on record for forever in case I got it wrong. And, oh man, now I want to look it up. That's all right. That's fine. So, but knowing the baseline things, and then if you want to get 100% and you want to know that very well, it's going to take more work. The difference between the kid who scores a 95 and the kid who scores 100 is probably twice as much studying. Just to put that in perspective. Everyone who's scoring an 80 is just studying a little bit usually. Obviously, you can have bad teachers at times and they're making bad tests, but generally speaking, to know a concept, that's kind of the idea. So, kind of on a developmental rant here, but if you want to work on a task, just put the effort in. That's it. And if you think that you're putting effort in, you really think you are, and it's actually hard for you, you're like, why am I not developing as much? Go online. Or if you have friends in the real world who are like this, ask them about their learning habit. And usually you will be humbled. You can say, hey, I'm putting in this much effort. I was getting better, and now I don't see a lot of growth. What's the deal? They'll usually tell you need to work harder and you need to put more effort in. Sometimes the way you are working is not smart. People say work smarter, not harder. So that can be, you've hit a plateau. I've done this with vocals. I've hit a plateau where I'm just not developing very much on my own. So now I'm taking vocal lessons to help that. And I can tell the difference immediately because there's an expert helping me with the thing now. So it can either be sometimes adding mentorship into that, therapy, someone to help you move you to the next step, or frequency. It can also be therapy. You can go into therapy more or putting in more effort outside of the room. So I'll probably leave it at that for everyone, but consider if you're going to therapy, be ready to put in the work because you're going to get more out of it, especially if you're spending anywhere like most people are, 80 to like $200 depending on where you're watching this. That's a lot of money every week. Even if you're doing it every other week, that's not nothing. So go into it ready to get your money's worth in the time. Come prepared. Come ready to focus, pay attention, do what you need to do. It doesn't have to be a stress event, but just be ready to do whatever you need to do there. And then in the off days, be ready to work on the things that need worked on. And you'll see a lot of growth. I can almost guarantee it. But you are a huge part. You're the most important part of that growth. The therapist is more of a guide. And the analogy of they can open doors, but they can't walk you through them is really good. You have to come ready to do that work. And a good therapist will help you identify what that work is, but you are over half of that factor. If you choose to do nothing, it won't work. You got to be ready. So go in really ready, go in really prepared to do that, and to just really give it your all. And I think you can be pleasantly surprised at what happens. Even if you say, I'm just going to give it 90 days. I'm going to go to therapy for 90 days, 12 weeks. And in between, I'm going to do everything the therapist says. As close to a promise as I can make, you'll see a change. So I feel really confident in that. So that's my encouragement. If you're interested in therapy services, my contact info is in the description. I can help you in the state of Kansas or Missouri or get you to someone who can. Anyone outside of that framework, I'll do my best to help you out. Gosh, the furthest one away was London. I tried really hard and I didn't have a connection in London. But yeah, so it doesn't really matter where you are. Reach out and I'll try and get you connected for therapy services and get you resources, whatever it is you need. I'm all about people getting the help that they need in the easiest way and simplest, least obstructive way possible. So yeah, thanks for listening and hope you all have a good Monday. Bye.